Hey guys, this is Cassidy, and today we're going to read The Inheritance Games, Part 8. Chapter 53. Someone shot at me. I felt numb wasn't the right word. My mouth was too dry. My heart was beating too fast. I hurt, but it felt like I was hurting from a distance. Shock. I need a team in the northeast quadrant. Orrin was on the phone. I tried to focus on what he was saying, but couldn't seem to focus on anything, not even my arm. We have a shooter. Gone now, most certainly, but we'll sweep the woods just in case. Bring a med kit. Orrin hung up, then turned his attention back to Jameson and me. Follow me. We'll stay here. We'll stay where we have cover until the support team gets here. He led us back toward the south end of the forest, where the trees were denser. It didn't take them long to arrive. They came in ATVs. 2 of them. 2 men, 2 vehicles. As soon as they pulled up, Orrin rattled off coordinates. Where we'd been when we were shot, the direction the bullets had come from, the trajectory. The men didn't say anything in response. They drew their weapons. Orrin climbed into the 4-seat ATV and waited for Jameson and me to do the same. You headed back to the house? One of the men asked. Orrin met his subordinate's eyes. The cottage. Halfway to Wayback Cottage, my brain started working again. My chest hurt. I'd been given a compress to hold on the wound, but Orrin hadn't treated it yet. His first priority had been getting us to safe ground. He's taking us to Wayback Cottage, not Hawthorne House. The cottage was closer, but I couldn't shake the feeling that what Orrin had really been saying to his men was that he didn't trust the people in the house. So much for the way he'd assured me, repeatedly, that I was safe, that the Hawthorne family wasn't a threat. The entire estate, including the Black Wood, was walled in. No one was allowed past the gate without a thorough background check. Orrin doesn't think we're dealing with an outside threat. I let that sink in, a heaviness in my stomach as I processed the limited number of suspects. The Hawthorns and the staff. Going to Wayback Cottage felt like a risk. I hadn't interacted with the Laughlins much, but they hadn't ever given me the impression that they were glad I was here. Exactly how loyal are they to the Hawthorne family? I thought about Elisa saying that Nash's people would die for him. Would they kill for him too? Miss Laughlin was at home when we arrived at Wayback. She's not the shooter, I thought. She couldn't have made it back here in time. Could she? The older woman took one look at Orrin, Jameson, and me, and ushered us inside. If a bleeding person being stitched up at her kitchen table was an unusual occurrence, she gave no sign of it. I wasn't sure if the way she was taking this in stride was comforting or suspicious. I'll put on some tea, she said. My heart pounding, I wondered if it was safe to drink anything she gave me. You okay with me playing medic? Orrin asked, settling me into a chair. I'm sure Elisa could arrange for some fancy plastic surgeon. I wasn't okay with any of this. Everyone had been so sure that I wasn't going to get axe murdered that I let my guard down. I had pushed back the thought that people had killed over far less than what I'd inherited. I'd let every single one of the Hawthorne brothers pass my defenses. This wasn't Xander. I couldn't get my body to calm down no matter how hard I tried. Jameson was right next to me. Nash doesn't want the money, and Grayson wouldn't. He wouldn't. Avery? Orrin prompted, a note of concern working its way into his deep voice. I tried to stop my mind from racing. I felt sick, physically sick. Stop panicking. I had a piece of wood in my flesh. I would have preferred not having a piece of wood in my flesh. Pull it together. Do what you need to do to stop the bleeding, I told Orrin. My voice only shook a little. Removing the bark hurt. The disinfectant hurt a hell of a lot more. The med kit included a shot of local anesthetic, but there was no amount of anesthetic that could alter my brain's awareness of the needle when Orrin began stitching my skin back together. Focus on that. Let it hurt. After a moment, I looked away from Orrin and tracked Miss Laughlin's movements. Before handing me my tea, she laced it heavily with whiskey. Done. Orrin nodded to my cup. Drink that. He'd brought me here because he trusted the Laughlins more than he trusted the Hawthorns. He was telling me that it was safe to drink. But he told me a lot of things. Someone shot at me. They tried to kill me. I could have been dead. My hands were shaking. Orrin steadied them. His eyes knowing, he lifted my teacup to his own mouth and took a drink. It's fine. He's showing me that it's fine. Unsure if I'd ever be able to kick myself out of fight or flight mode, I forced myself to drink. The tea was hot, the whiskey strong. It burned all the way down. Miss Laughlin gave me an almost maternal look, then scowled at Orrin. Mr. Laughlin will want to know what happened, she said, as if she herself were not at all curious about why I was bleeding at her kitchen table. And someone needs to clean up the poor girl's face. She gave me a sympathetic look and clucked her tongue. Before I'd been an outsider. Now she was hovering like a mother hen. All it took was a few bullets. "Where is Mr. Laughlin?" Orrin asked, his tone conversational, but I heard the question, and the implication underneath. "He's not here. Is he a good shot?" Would he? As if summoned, Mr. Laughlin walked through the front door and let it slam behind him. There was mud on his boots. "From the woods?" "Something's happened," Miss Laughlin told her husband calmly. Miss Laughlin looked at Orrin, Jameson, and me, in that order, the same order in which his wife had taken in our presence, and then poured himself a glass of whiskey. "Security protocols?" he asked Orrin gruffly. Orrin gave a brisk nod. "In full force." He turned back to his wife. "Where's Rebecca?" he asked. Jameson looked up from his own cup of tea. "Rebecca's here?" "She's a good girl," Mr. Laughlin grunted. "Comes to visit, the way she should." "So where is she?" I thought. Miss Laughlin rested a hand on my shoulder. "There's a bathroom through there, dear," she told me quietly, "if you want to clean up." Chapter 54. The door Miss Laughlin had sent me through didn't lead directly to a bathroom. It led to a bedroom that held 2 twin beds and little else. The walls were painted a light purple. The twin comforters were quilted from squares of fabric in lavender and violet. The bathroom door was slightly ajar. I walked toward it, so painfully aware of my surroundings that I felt like I could have heard a pin drop a mile away. "There's no one here. I'm safe. It's okay. I'm okay." Inside the bathroom, I checked behind the shower curtain. "There's no one here," I told myself again. "I'm okay." I managed to get my cell phone out of my pocket and called Max. I needed her to answer. I needed to not be alone with this. What I got was voicemail. I called 7 times and she didn't pick up. Maybe she couldn't, or maybe she doesn't want to. That hit me almost as hard as looking in the mirror and seeing my blood-streaked, dirt-smeared face. I stared at myself. I could hear the echo of gunfire. Stop. I needed to wash my hands, my face, the streaks of blood on my chest. "Turn on the water," I told myself sternly. "Pick up the washcloth." I willed my body to move. I couldn't. Hands reached past me to turn on the faucet. I should have jumped. I should have panicked. But somehow my body relaxed into the person behind me. "It's okay, Eris," Jameson murmured. "I've got you." I hadn't heard Jameson come in. I wasn't entirely sure how long I'd been standing there, frozen. Jameson reached for a pale purple washcloth and held it under the water. "I'm fine," I insisted, as much to myself as to him. Jameson lifted the washcloth to my face. "You're a horrible liar." He ran the cloth over my cheek, working his way down the scratch. A breath caught in my throat. He rinsed the washcloth, blood and dirt soaking the sink, as he lifted the cloth back to my skin. Again and again. He washed my face, took my hands in his, and held them under the water, his fingers working the dirt from mine. My skin responded to his touch. For the first time, no part of me said to pull away. He was so gentle. He wasn't acting like this was just a game to him, like I was just a game. He picked the washcloth back up and ran it down my neck to my shoulder, over my collarbone and across. The water was warm. I leaned into his touch. This is a bad idea. I knew that. I'd always known that, but I let myself concentrate on the feel of Jameson Hawthorne's touch, the stroke of the cloth. "I'm okay," I said, and I could almost believe that. "You're better than okay." I closed my eyes. He'd been there with me in the forest. I could feel his body over mine, protecting me. I needed this. I needed something. I opened my eyes, looked at him, focused on him. I thought about going 200 miles an hour, about the climbing wall, about the moment I'd first seen him up on that balcony. Was being a sensation seeker so bad? Was wanting to feel something other than awful really so wrong? Everyone is a little wrong sometimes, Eris. Something gave inside of me, and I pushed him gently back against the bathroom wall. I need this. His deep green eyes met mine. He needs it too. Yes? I asked him hoarsely. "Yes, Eris." My lips closed over his. He kissed me back, gentle at first, but then not gently at all. Maybe it was the after effects of shock, but as I drove my hands into his hair, as he grabbed my ponytail and angled my face upward, I could see 1,000 versions of him in my mind. Balanced on the balcony's railing, shirtless and sunlit in the solarium, smiling, smirking, our hands touching on the bridge, his body protecting mine in the black wood, trailing a washcloth down my neck. Kissing him felt like fire. He wasn't soft and sweet the way he had been while he was washing the blood and dirt. I didn't need soft or sweet. This was exactly what I needed. Maybe I could be what he needed too. Maybe this didn't have to be a bad idea. Maybe the complications were worth it. He pulled back from the kiss, his lips only an inch from mine. I always knew you were special. I felt his breath on my face. I felt every last one of his words. I'd never thought of myself as special. I'd been invisible for so long. Wallpaper. Even after I'd become the biggest story in the world, it had never really felt like anyone was paying attention to me. The real me. We're so close now, Jameson murmured. I can feel it. There was an energy in his voice, like the buzzing of a neon light. Someone obviously didn't want us looking at that tree. What? He went to kiss me again, and, my heart sinking, I turned my head to the side. I wasn't sure what I thought. That when he told me I was special, he wasn't talking about the money or the puzzle. You think someone shot at us because of a tree? I said, the words getting caught in my throat. Not, say, the fortune I inherited that your family would like to get their hands on? Not the billions of reasons that anyone with the last name Hawthorne has to hate me? Don't think about that, Jameson whispered, cupping my cheeks. Think about Toby's name carved into that tree. Infinity carved into the bridge. His face was close enough to mine that I could still feel his breath. What if what the puzzle is trying to tell us is that my uncle isn't dead? Was that what he'd been thinking about when someone was shooting at us? In the kitchen, as Orrin took a needle to my wound, as he brought his lips to mine, because the only thing he'd been able to think about was the mystery. You're not a player, kid. You're the glass ballerina, or the knight. Will you listen to yourself? I demanded. My chest was tight, tighter now than it had been in the forest, in the thick of it all. Nothing about Jameson's reaction should have surprised me, so why did it hurt? Why was I letting it hurt? Orrin just pulled a chunk of wood out of my chest, I said, my voice low. And if things had worked out a little differently, he could have been pulling out a bullet. I gave Jameson a second to reply. Just one. Nothing. What happens to the money if I die while the will is in probate? I asked flatly. Elisa had told me that the Hawthorne family didn't stand to benefit, but did they know that? What happens if whoever fired that gun scares me off and I leave before the year is up? Did they know that if I left, it all went to charity? Not everything is a game, Jameson. I saw something flicker in his eyes. He closed them just for an instant, then opened them and leaned in, bringing his lips painfully close to mine. That's the thing, Eris. If Emily taught me anything, it's that everything is a game. Even this. Especially this. Chapter 55. Jameson left, and I didn't follow him. Thea's right, Grayson whispered in the recesses of her mind. This family, we destroy everything we touch. I choked back tears. I'd been shot at, I'd been injured, and I'd been kissed, but I sure as hell wasn't destroyed. I'm stronger than that. I angled my face toward the mirror and looked myself in the eye. If it came down to a choice between being scared, being hurt, and being pissed, I knew which one I preferred. I tried calling Max one more time, then texted her. Someone tried to kill me, and I made out with Jameson Hawthorne. If that didn't garner a response, nothing would. I made my way back into the bedroom. Even though I'd calmed down a little, I'd still scanned for threats, and I saw one. Rebecca Laughlin, standing in the doorway. Her face looked even paler than usual, her hair as red as blood. She looked shell-shocked. Because she overheard Jameson and me? Because her grandparents told her about the shooting? I wasn't sure. She was wearing thick hiking boots and cargo pants, both of them splattered with mud. Staring at her, all I could think about was that if Emily had been half as beautiful as her sister was, it was no wonder Jameson could look at me and think only about his grandfather's name. Everything is a game, even this. Especially this. My grandmother sent me to check on you. Rebecca's voice was soft and hesitant. I'm okay, I said, and I almost meant it. I had to be okay. Grant said you were shot. Rebecca stayed in the doorway like she was afraid to come any closer. Shot at, I clarified. I'm glad, Rebecca said. Then she looked mortified. I mean, that you weren't shot. It's good, right? Getting shot at instead of shot? Her gaze darted nervously from me toward the twin beds, the quilts. Emily would have told you to simplify and say that you were shot. Rebecca sounded more sure of herself telling me what Emily would have said than trying to summon an appropriate response herself. If there was a bullet, you were wounded. Emily would have said you were entitled to a little melodrama. I was entitled to look at everyone like they were a suspect. I was entitled to an adrenaline-fueled lapse in judgment. And maybe I was entitled, just this once, to push her answers. You and Emily shared this room? I asked. That was obvious now when I looked at the twin beds. When Rebecca and Emily came to visit their grandparents, they stayed here. Was purple your favorite color as a kid, or hers? Hers, Rebecca said. She gave me a very small shrug. She used to tell me that my favorite color was purple, too. In the picture I'd seen of the two of them, Emily had been looking directly at the camera, dead center. Rebecca had been on the fringes, looking away. I feel like I should warn you. Rebecca wasn't even facing me anymore. She walked over to one of the beds. Warn me about what? I asked, and somewhere in the back of my mind I registered the mud on her boots, and the fact that she'd been on the premises, but not with her grandparents, when I'd been shot at. Just because she doesn't feel like a threat doesn't mean she isn't one. But when Rebecca started talking again, it wasn't about the shooting. I'm supposed to say that my sister was wonderful. She acted like that this wasn't a change of subject, like Emily was what she had been warning me about. And she was, when she wanted to be. Her smile was contagious, her laugh was worse, and when she said something was a good idea, people believed her. She was good to me almost all the time. Rebecca met my gaze head on. But she wasn't nearly as good to those boys. Boys, plural. Plural. What did she do? I asked. I should have been more focused on who shot me, but part of me couldn't shake the way Jameson had evoked Emily right before walking away from me. Em didn't like to choose. Rebecca seemed to be picking her words carefully. She wanted everything more than I wanted anything. And the one time I wanted something, she shook her head and aborted that sentence. My job was to keep my sister happy. It's something my parents used to tell me when we were little, that Emily was sick and I wasn't, so I should do what I could to make her smile. And the boys? I asked. That they made her smile. I read into what Rebecca was saying. Emma didn't like to choose. She dated both of them. I tried to get a handle on that. Did they know? Not at first, Rebecca whispered, like some part of her thought Emily might hear us talking. What happened when Grayson and Jameson found out she was dating both of them? You're only asking that because you didn't know, Emily, Rebecca said. She didn't want to choose, and neither of them wanted to let her go. She turned it into a competition, a little game. And then she died. How did Emily die? I asked, because I might never get another opening like this one. Not with Rebecca, not with the boys. Rebecca was looking at me, but I got the general sense that she wasn't seeing me, that she was somewhere else. Grayson told me that it was her heart, she whispered. Grayson. I couldn't think beyond that. It wasn't until Rebecca had left that I realized she'd never gotten around to telling me what, specifically, she ought to have been warning me about. Chapter 56. It was another 3 hours before Orrin and his team cleared me to go back to Hawthorne House. I rode back in the ATV with 3 bodyguards. Orrin was the only one who spoke. Due in part to Hawthorne House's extensive network of security cameras, my team was able to track and verify locations and alibis for all members of the Hawthorne family, as well as Miss Thea Caligaris. They have alibis. Grayson has an alibi. I felt a rush of relief, but a moment later, my chest tightened. What about Constantine? I asked. Technically, he wasn't a Hawthorne. Clear, Orrin told me. He did not personally wield that gun. Personally. Reading between those lines shook me. But he might have hired someone? Any of them might have, I realized. I could hear Grayson telling me that there would always be people tripping over themselves to do favors for his family. I know a forensic investigator, Orrin said evenly. He works alongside an equally skilled hacker. They'll take a deep dive into everyone's finances and cell phone records. In the meantime, my team is going to focus on the staff. I swallowed. I hadn't even met most of the staff. I didn't know exactly how many of them there were, or who might have had the opportunity or motive. The entire staff? I asked Orrin, including the Lochlins. They'd been kind to me after I'd emerged from washing up, but right now I couldn't afford to trust my gut, or Orrin's. They're clear, Orrin told me. Mr. Lochlin was at the house during the shooting, and security footage confirms Miss Lochlin was at the cottage. What about Rebecca? I asked. She left the estate right after talking to me. I could see Orrin wanting to say that Rebecca wasn't a threat, but he didn't. No stone will be left unturned, he promised, but I do know that the Lochlin girls never learned to shoot. Mr. Lochlin wasn't even allowed to keep a gun at the cottage when they were present. Who else was on the premises today? I asked. Pool maintenance, a sound technician working on upgrades in the theater, a massage therapist, and one of the cleaning staff. I committed that list to memory, and my mouth went dry. Which cleaning staff? Melissa Vincent. The name meant nothing to me until it did. Melly? Orrin's eyes narrowed. You know her? I thought of the moment she'd seen Nash outside Libby's room. Something I should know? Orrin asked, and it wasn't really a question. I told him what Elise had said about Melly and Nash, what I'd seen in Libby's room, what Melly had seen. And then we pulled up to Hawthorne House and I saw Elisa. She's the only person I'd let pass the gates, Orrin assured me. Frankly, she's the only one I intend to let pass those gates for the foreseeable future. I probably should have found that more comforting than I did. How is she? Elisa asked Orrin as soon as we exited the SUV. Pissed, I answered, before Orrin could reply on my behalf. Sore, a little terrified. Seeing her, and seeing Orrin standing next to her, broke the dam, and an accusation burst out of me. You both told me I would be fine. You swore I was not in danger. You acted like I was being ridiculous when I mentioned murder. Technically, my lawyer replied, you specified axe murder. And technically, she continued through gritted teeth, it's possible that there was an oversight, legally speaking. What kind of oversight? You told me that if I died, the Hawthorns wouldn't get a penny. And I stand by that conclusion, Elisa said empathetically. However, she clearly found any omission of fault distasteful. I also told you that if you died while the will was in probate, your inheritance would pass through to your estate. And typically it would. Typically, I repeated. If there was one thing I learned about the past week, it was that there is nothing typical about Tobias Hawthorne, or his heirs. However, Elisa continued, her voice tight, in the state of Texas, it is possible for the deceased to add a stipulation to the will that requires heirs to survive him by a certain amount of time in order to inherit. I'd read the will multiple times. Pretty sure I'd remember if there was something in there about how long I had to avoid dying to inherit. The only stipulation was that you had to live in Hawthorne House for 1 year, Elisa finished. Which, I will admit, would be quite the difficult stipulation to fulfill if you were dead. So that was her oversight? The fact that I couldn't live in Hawthorne House if I wasn't alive? So if I die, I swallowed, wetting my tongue. The money goes to charity? Possible, but it's also possible that your heirs could challenge that interpretation on the basis of Mr. Hawthorne's intent. I don't have heirs, I said. I don't even have a will. You don't need a will to have heirs. Elisa glared at Orrin. Has your sister been cleared? Libby? I was incredulous. Had they met my sister? The sister's clear, Orrin told Elisa. She was with Nash during the shooting. He might as well have detonated a bomb for how well that went over. Eventually, Elisa gathered her composure and turned back to me. You won't legally be able to sign a will until you turn 18. Ditto for the paperwork regarding the foundation conservatorship. And that is the other oversight here. Originally, I was focused only on the will, but if you are unable or unwilling to fulfill your role as conservator, the conservatorship passes. She paused heavily. To the boys. If I died, the foundation, all the money, all the power, all that potential, went to Tobias Hawthorne's grandsons. $100 million a year to give away. You could buy a lot of favors with money like that. Who knows about the terms of the conservatorship? Orrin asked, deadly serious. Zara and Constantine, certainly, Elisa said immediately. Grayson, I added hoarsely. My wound stopped, throbbing. I knew him well enough to know that he would have demanded to see the conservatorship papers himself. He wouldn't hurt me. I wanted to believe that. All he does is warn me away. How soon can you have documents drawn up leaving control of the foundation to Avery's sister in the event of her death? Orrin demanded. If this was about control of the foundation, that would protect me. Or else it would put Libby in danger too. Is anyone going to ask me what I want to do? I asked. I can have the documents drawn up tomorrow, Elisa told Orrin, ignoring me. But Avery can't sign them until she's 18, and even then, it's unclear if she's authorized to make that kind of decision prior to assuming full control of the foundation at the age of 21. Until then, I had a target on my forehead. What would it take to evoke the protection clause in the will? Orrin changed tactics. There are certain circumstances under which Avery could remove the Hawthorns as tenants, correct? We'd need evidence, Elisa replied. Something that ties a specific individual to acts of harassment, intimidation, or violence, and even then, Avery can only kick out the perpetrator, not the whole family. And then she can't live somewhere else for the time being? No. Orrin didn't like that, but he didn't waste time on unnecessary commentary. You'll go nowhere without me, Orrin told me, steel in his voice. Not on the estate, not in the house. Nowhere, you understand? I was always close by. Now I get to play visible deterrent. Beside me, Elisa narrowed her eyes at Orrin. What do you know that I don't? There was a single moment's pause, then my bodyguard answered the question. I had my people check the armory. Nothing is missing. In all likelihood, the weapon fired at Avery wasn't a Hawthorne gun, but I had my men pull the security footage from the past few days anyway. I was too busy trying to wrap my mind around the fact that Hawthorne House had an armory to process the rest. The armory had a visitor? Elisa asked, her voice almost too calm. 2 of them. Orrin seemed like he might stop there for my benefit, but he pressed on. Jameson and Grayson. Both have alibis, but both were looking at rifles. Hawthorne House has an armory? That was all I could manage to say. This is Texas, Orrin replied. The whole family grew up shooting, and Mr. Hawthorne was a collector. A gun collector, I clarified. I hadn't been a fan of firearms before I'd almost been shot. If you read the binder I left you detailing your assets, Elisa interjected, you'd know that Mr. Hawthorne had the world's largest collection of late 19th and early 20th century Winchester rifles, several of which are valued at upward of $400,000. The idea that anyone would pay that much for a rifle was mind-boggling, but I barely batted an eye at the price tag because I was too busy thinking that there was a reason Jameson and Grayson both had made visits to the armory to look at rifles, one that had nothing to do with shooting me. Jameson's middle name was Winchester. Chapter 57. Even though it was the dead of night, I made Orrin take me to the armory. Following him through twisting hallway after hallway, all I could think of was that someone could hide forever in this house. And that wasn't counting the secret passages. Eventually, Orrin came to a stop in the long corridor. This is it. He stood in front of an ornate gold mirror. As I watched, he ran his hand along the side of the frame. I heard a click, and then the mirror swung out into the hallway like a door. Behind it was the steel. There was steel. Orrin stepped up, and I saw a line of red go down his face. Facial recognition, he informed me. It's really only meant as a backup security measure. The best way to keep intruders from breaking into the safe is to make sure they don't even know it's there. Hence the mirror. He pushed the door inward. The entire armory is lined with reinforced steel. He stepped through, and I followed. When I'd heard the word armory, I'd pictured something out of a movie. Copious amounts of black and Rambo-style cartridges on the walls. What I got looked more like a country club. The walls were lined with cabinets of a deep cherry-colored wood. There was an intricately carved table in the center of the room, complete with a marble top. This is the armory? I said. There was a rug on the floor. A plush, expensive rug that looked like it belonged in a dining room. Not what you were expecting. Not what you were expecting? Orrin closed the door behind us. It clicked into place, and then he flipped 3 additional deadbolts in quick succession. There are safe rooms scattered throughout the house. This doubles as one. A tornado shelter, too. I'll show you the location of the others later, just in case. In case someone tries to kill me. Rather than dwelling on that, I focused on the reason I'd come here. Where are the Winchesters? I asked. There are at least 30 Winchester rifles in the collection. Orrin nodded toward a wall of display cases. Any particular reason you wanted to see them? A day earlier, I might have kept this secret, but Jameson hadn't told me what he'd looked for, possibly found, the clue corresponding to his own middle name. I didn't owe him any secrecy now. I'm looking for something, I told Orrin. A message from Tobias Hawthorne. A clue. A carving, most likely some kind of number or symbol. The etching on the tree and the black wood had been neither. Mid-kiss, Jameson had seemed convinced that Toby's name was the next clue, but I wasn't so sure. The writing hadn't been a match for the carving at the bridge. It had been uneven, childlike. What if Toby had carved it himself as a kid? What if the real clue was still out there in the woods? I can't go back, not until we know who the shooter is. Orrin could clear a room and tell me it was safe. He couldn't clear a whole forest. Pushing back against the echo of gunshots and everything that had come after, I opened one of the cabinets. Any thoughts on where your former employer might have hidden a message? I asked Orrin, my focus intense. Which gun? Which part of the gun? Mr. Hawthorne rarely took me into his confidence, Orrin told me. I didn't always know how his mind worked, but I respected him, and that respect was mutual. Orrin removed a cloth from the drawer and unfolded it, spreading it across the marble top. Then he walked over to the cabinet I'd opened and lifted out one of the rifles. "None of them are loaded," he said intently, "but you treat them like they are. Always." He laid the gun down on the cloth and ran his finger slightly over the barrel. This was one of his favorites. He was one hell of a shot. I got the sense there was a story there, one he'd probably never tell me. Orrin stepped back, and I took that as my cue to approach. Everything in me wanted to shrink back from the rifle. The bullets that had been fired at me were too fresh in my own memory. My wounds still throbbed, but I made myself examine each part of the weapon, looking for something, anything, that might be a clue. Finally, I turned back to Orrin. "Where do you load the bullets?" I found what I was looking for on the fourth gun. To load a bullet into a Winchester rifle, you cocked a lever away from the stock. On the underside of that lever, on the fourth gun I looked at, were 3 letters. O-N-E. The way it had been etched into the metal made the letters look like initials, but I read it as a number. To go with the one we found on the bridge. Not infinity, I thought. 8. And now 1. 8, 1. Chapter 58. Orrin escorted me back to my wing. I thought about knocking on Libby's door, but it was late. Too late. And it wasn't like I could just pop in and say, "There's murder afoot, sleep tight." Orrin did a sweep of my quarters and then took up position outside my door, feet spread shoulder-width apart, hands dangling by his side. He had to sleep sometime, but as the door closed between us, I knew it wouldn't be tonight. I pulled my phone back out of my pocket and stared at it. Nothing from Max. She was a night owl and 2 hours behind me time zone-wise. There was no way she was asleep. I DM'd her the same message I texted her earlier to every social media account she had. "Please respond," I thought desperately. "Please, Max." Nothing. I hadn't meant to say it out loud. Trying not to feel utterly alone, I made my way to the bathroom, laid my phone on the counter, and slipped off my clothes. Naked, I looked at the mirror. Except for my face and the bandages over my stitches, my skin looked untouched. I peeled the bandage back. The wound was angry and red, the stitches even and small. I stared at it. Someone, almost certainly someone in the Hawthorne family, wanted me dead. I could be dead right now. I pictured their faces, one by one. Jameson had been there with me when the shots rang out. Nash had claimed from the beginning that he didn't want the money. Xander had been nothing but welcoming. But Grayson... If you were smart, you'd stay away from Jameson, from the game, from me. He'd warned me. He told me that their family destroyed everything they touched. When I asked Rebecca how Emily had died, it hadn't been Jameson's name she mentioned. Grayson told me that it was her heart. I flipped the shower on as hot as it would go and stepped in, turning my chest from the stream and letting the hot water beat against my back. It hurt, but all I wanted was to scrub this entire night off me. What had happened in the Blackwood, what had happened with Jameson, all of it. I broke down. Crying in the shower didn't count. After a minute or two, I got a hold of myself and turned the water off, just in time to hear my phone ringing. Wet and dripping, I lunged for it. "Hello?" "You had better not be lying about the assassination attempt, or the making out." My body sagged in relief. "Max." She must have heard in my tone that I wasn't lying. What the elf, Avery? What the everlasting mother-foxing elf is going on there? I told her. All of it. Every detail, every moment, everything I'd been trying not to feel. "You have to get out of there." For once, Max was deadly serious. "What?" I said. I shivered and finally managed to grab a towel. "Someone tried to kill you," Max said with exaggerated patience. "So you need to get out of Murderland. Like, now." "I can't leave," I said. "I have to live there for a year or I lose everything." "So your life goes back to the way it was a week ago. Is that so bad?" "Yes," I said incredulously. "I was living in my car, Max, with no guarantee of a future." Keyword, living. I pulled the towel tighter around me. "Are you saying you would give up billions?" "Well, my other suggestion involves preemptively whacking the entire Hawthorne family, and I was afraid you'd take that as an euphemism. Max." "Hey, I'm not the one who made out with James Hawthorne." I wanted to explain to her how exactly I'd let that happen, but all that came out of my mouth was, "Where were you?" "Excuse me?" "I called you right after it happened, before the thing with Jameson. I needed you, Max." There was a long, pregnant silence on the other end of the phone line. "I'm doing just fine," she said. "Everything here is just peachy. Thanks for asking." Exactly." Max lowered her voice. "Did you even notice that I'm not calling from my phone?" This is my brother's. I'm on lockdown. Total lockdown because of you. I'd known the last time we talked that something wasn't right. What do you mean because of me? Do you really want to know? What kind of question was that? Of course I do. Because you haven't asked about me at all since any of this happened. She blew out a long breath. Let's be honest, Abe, you barely asked about me before. My stomach tightened. That's not true. Your mom died and you needed me. And with everything with Libby and that Bob-forsaken ship stain, you really needed me. And then you inherited billions and billions of dollars, so of course you needed me. And I was happy to be there, Avery. But do you even know my boyfriend's name? I racked my mind, trying to remember. Jared? Wrong, Max said after a moment. The correct answer is that I don't have a boyfriend anymore, because I caught Jackson on my phone, trying to send himself screenshots of your text to me. A reporter offered to pay him for them. Her pause was painful in it this time. Do you want to know how much? My heart sank. I'm so sorry, Max. Me too, Max said bitterly. But I'm especially sorry that I ever let him take pictures of me. Personal pictures. Because when I broke up with him, he sent those pictures to my parents. Max was like me. She only cried in the shower. But her voice was hitching now. I'm not even allowed to date, Avery. How well do you think that went down? I couldn't even imagine. What do you need? I asked her. I need my life back. She went quiet just for a moment. You know what the worst part is? I can't even be mad at you because someone tried to shoot you. Her voice got very soft. And you need me. That hurt because it was true. I needed her. I'd always needed her more than she needed me, because she was my friend, singular, and I was one of many for her. I'm sorry, Max. She made a dismissive sound. Yeah, well, next time someone tries to shoot you, you're gonna have to buy me something really nice to make it up to me. Like Australia. You want me to buy you a trip to Australia? I asked, thinking that could probably be arranged. No, her reply was pert. I want you to buy me Australia. You can afford it. I snorted. I don't think it's for sale. Then I guess you have no choice but to avoid getting shot at. I'll be careful, I promised. Whoever tried to kill me isn't going to get another chance. Good. Max was quiet for a few seconds. Ave, I have to go. And I don't know when I'm going to be able to borrow another phone, or get online, or anything. My fault. I tried to tell myself this wasn't goodbye, not forever. Love you, Max. Love you too, Beach. After we hung up, I sat there in my towel, feeling that something inside of me had been carved out. Eventually, I made my way back to my bedroom and threw on some pajamas. I was in bed, thinking about everything Max had said, wondering if I was a fundamentally selfish or needy person, when I heard a sound scratching on the walls. I stopped breathing and listened. There it was again. The passageway. Jameson? I called. He was the only one who'd used this passage into my room, or at least the only one I knew of. Jameson, this isn't funny. There was no response, but when I got up and walked toward the passageway, then stood very still, I could have sworn I heard someone breathing, right on the other side of the wall. I gripped the candlestick, prepared to pull it and face down whoever or whatever stood beyond. But then my common sense, and my promise to Max, caught up to me, and I opened the door to the hallway instead. Orrin, I said, there's something you should know. Orrin searched the passageway, then disabled its entrance into my room. He also suggested I should spend the night in Libby's room, which didn't have passageway access. It wasn't really a suggestion. My sister was asleep when I knocked. She roused but barely. I crawled into bed with her, and she didn't ask why. After my conversation with Max, I was fairly certain I didn't want to tell her. Libby's entire life had already been turned upside down because of me. Twice. First when my mom had died, and then all of this. She'd already given me everything. She had her own issues to deal with. She didn't need mine. Under the covers, I hugged a pillow tight to my body and rolled toward Libby. I needed to be close to her, even if I couldn't tell her why. Libby's eyes fluttered, and she snuggled up next to me. I willed myself not to think about anything else. Not the black woods, not the hawthorns, nothing. I let darkness overcome me, and I slept. I dreamed that I was back at the diner. I was young, 5 or 6, and happy. I placed 2 sugar packets vertically on the table and bring their ends together, forming a triangle capable of standing on its own. There, I say. I do the same with the next pair of packets, then set a 5th across them horizontal, connecting the 2 triangles I built. Avery, Avery Kylie Grams. My mother appears at the end of the table, smiling. What have I told you about building castles out of sugar? I beamed back at her. It's only worth it if you can go 5 stories tall. I woke with a start. I turned over, expecting to see Libby, but her side of the bed was empty. Morning light was streaming in through the windows. I made my way to Libby's bathroom, but she wasn't there either. I was getting ready to go back to my room, in my bathroom, when I saw something at the counter. Libby's phone. She'd missed texts, dozens of them, all from Drake. There were only 3, the most recent, that I could read without a password. I love you. You know I love you, Libby 9. I know that you love me.